Satan's throne is. And it's at the first letter that we're going to be getting into tonight at Pergamum. But to remind ourselves where we've been, let's go ahead and go through this quiz together. If you've already taken this and you want to grade yourself, that's great. If you want to do it mentally with us as we go through, that's fine. The first letter to 7 churches would be the church at Ephesus. And there are several things that he says that are good about the church at Ephesus. And it's interesting. He starts off and talks about the good, and then he says, but I have something against you. And then he comes back and finishes off with more good. And somebody was asking me after class about that tactic. This is Jesus' approach to writing the churches. And sometimes it's easy to confuse with Paul's approach. Now, the Holy Spirit's working through Paul, and so it's really God's Word when we're reading Scripture. But he allows each individual writer to use their own particular presentation. So you get a little different flavor from John, for example, than you do from Paul. But Paul typically, when he addresses churches, will always start with the positive. And I just find that as very insightful. Start with something good. Compliment somebody. Focus on the good first. There's only one letter that he writes where he jumps right in and starts talking about all the bad. Do you know which one that is?
1 Corinthians.
Galatians. Paul seems to be more upset with the churches in the area of Galatia than any other time, and he doesn't start with anything good. It's kind of like, I just got to talk about the problems. Well, what we're going to find in the letters to 7 churches is Jesus typically starts by focusing on the good. There are 2 churches, however, doesn't have anything good to say about. There are 2 churches he doesn't have anything bad to say about, not really. And the letter to the church at Ephesus, he says both good and bad. So there are several things that he says to them in way of compliment. Can you name 1 or 2 of them? What have they done that's good? Endured hardships. What else have they done that's good?
They don't tolerate false teaching.
They don't tolerate false teachers, especially those who claim to be an apostle or something like that. That's exactly right. How about what had the church in Ephesus done that was bad? What was it that they were reprimanded for?
They forsook the love they had.
Yeah, lost their first love. So it seems as though they were staying good as far as being true to the truth, but they forgot the part about speak the truth in love. Which, by the way, where is that verse in the New Testament? Speak the truth in love. It's in a book called Ephesians. Hey, wonder where that church is. It's Ephesians chapter 4, where that verse is found. Speak the truth in love. Okay, what are the Nicolaitans?
Victorious at lowering the standard. That was the literal term.
Okay. First of all, the first thing we have to say is we're not sure. We have no clear definition of what the Nicolaitans are. So what we do is we take the word apart and we see what the word itself means. And the first part of this word in the Greek language means to conquer. It means to conquer, to be victorious, to conquer people, to be victorious over people, to sway people. And we're going to see the Nicolaitans were not only mentioned at the church at Ephesus, but they're going to be mentioned again. So we'll talk a little bit more about this. But the other interesting thing about the term Nicolaitan, which means to sway people probably away from the truth by compromising the truth, is that it's associated with Balaam. In fact, the spelling of the word in the Greek language is very close to the way you'd spell Balaam in the Greek Old Testament, the LXX, the Septuagint. Okay, who's Polycarp? He was a martyr at which church? Smyrna, that's exactly right. And whose disciple was he? Yeah, the Apostle John, the very one who wrote this. So one of the churches that's commended because they're a good church. What's a synagogue? Well, let's take this one step at a time. What's a synagogue?
It's like a Jewish version of a church.
Yeah, it's religious, but it's also a social meeting place. Center of life for Jewish people, right? Especially in biblical times. New Testament. Intertestamental period is where the synagogues first developed. But you find it mentioned frequently in the New Testament. Why does Jesus, this is Jesus, calling the Jewish gathering place a synagogue of Satan?
Aren't they persecuting Christians?
Yeah, the way he words it is he says they call themselves Jews, but they're not. It's a synagogue of Satan. So you can go through the motions. You can sit in a church, you can sit in a synagogue, you can call yourself a Christian, you can call yourself a Jew. Doesn't make you a Jew, doesn't make you a Christian. Your association doesn't. It's who rules and who are you following, how do you live. And what in reality was happening was the Jews were being used by Satan to actually persecute the Christians who were in Smyrna. So instead of it being a gathering to actually please God, it was a gathering that Satan was using for the church at Smyrna. Okay, how long is suffering that lasts for 10 days?
Really long time.
Yeah, in one sense you'd say 10 days. The reason I ask this question is this is a reminder we're in the book of Revelation. It is not fair to do this with the rest of the Bible. But in places where it makes it clear we're talking about apocalyptic literature, the opening of the book of Revelation, chapter 1, the first 2 verses, uses a term that's translated in most English translations, says to make known. But the phrase to make known is really a Greek word that means by use of signs and symbols. And it's obvious we're dealing with apocalyptic literature code language. So 10, it means complete. If it said 10 years, 10 centuries, that'd be a different thing, but it says 10 days. So a complete period of time, the days would be short. So it is going to be short suffering, it's going to be tough, but it's not going to last. It's not going to last. And he says that by way of encouragement to the church at Smyrna. What kind of crown is offered to the faithful in Sardis?
Victor's crown.
Yeah, is it Sardis or Smyrna?
Smyrna.
Smyrna. Yeah, I wrote the wrong thing down. Sorry about that. We haven't come to Sardis yet. Should have been Smyrna. Yeah. Anyway, most of the time, the term for crown used in the book of Revelation would be the wreath that they gave to the victors of the Olympic Games. And it's the victor's crown. It's like we would talk about the gold medal. You get the gold medal. And that's what he's talking about, them being faithful and winning. What is the second death?
Hell.
Hell. We're going to hit this over in Revelation chapter 20. But he tells the church of Smyrna they avoid the second death. Right? How does one avoid the second death?
Born twice.
I was going to say you're baptized, but that's...
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
Born twice, die once.
That's what you said last
Born
time.
once, die twice. So you're going to experience the second death if you've only been born once. But if you've been born twice, if you've been born again, you don't experience the second death. I love that saying, just wanted to remind that. How does Jesus hold on to the seven? Well, what are the 7 stars?
The churches?
No, the churches are
The candlesticks.
the candle, not candle, lampstand.
Lampstand.
Thank you. Right.
I saw a light in the
But,
candle.
yeah. Saw a bright light. The stars are what?
Messengers.
The messengers, the angels, that's right. How does Jesus hold the 7 stars?
In his hand, but a grip.
Right hand.
Okay, yeah, he does not hold them like this. He does hold them like this. Interesting distinction. He has total grasp of them. Okay, we are down to verse 12. In verse 12 is going to be the third letter to the church at Pergamum. Art and literature were encouraged in ancient Pergamum. Had a city library of over 200,000 volumes, which would make it the second largest library in antiquity. Where's the largest library in antiquity?
Alexandria.
Alexandria, Egypt. They buried everybody else far and away. They were way out there. But Pergamum was really known as an intellectual center. They had this huge library, 200,000 volumes, which, remember, this is before the printing press. These are manuscripts. These are hand copies. Amazing. Which later Antony gave to Cleopatra. Oh yeah, thanks for giving all the way from the Roman possession there. The books were of parchment. What is parchment?
Is it pounded like papyrus or something?
Parchment's made of what?
Isn't it made of animal?
No, it's not papyrus. That's part of the reason I asked. It's not papyrus. Papyrus is the forerunner to paper that we have today. What's parchment? Anybody here graduate and get some parchment handed to you in the graduation service? I don't think they do it anymore, but they used to.
Sheepskin, they used to.
It's animal skin. That's what parchment is. Sheep, pig, they use different animals, but it was animal skin. Parchment was first used and developed in Pergamum. That's why we get the name for parchment from Pergamus or Pergamum. That's where it came from. I find that all interesting. So here you go, intellectual center. There's a couple more things you need to know about Pergamum. These are the best visuals I could find on Google. You could probably do better than me, but these are the best ones I could find. This is sometimes referred to as Zeus's temple, or sometimes just Zeus's throne. Sometimes it's just called Zeus's throne. There's a temple to Zeus, who's one of the chief gods if you're up on your mythology. But that's at Pergamum. There's also a god named Asclepius. Asclepius is associated with the snake. And according to Barclay, who did some background study on this, he said that the ancient practice was for anybody who was sick, had problems, physical problems, they would make the journey to Pergamum. They would pay the fee so that they could sleep in the temple. They would sleep at the temple at night, and the temple priest would release the snakes. And if you were lucky enough to have a snake slither over your body in the evening while you slept, which I'm thinking, how could you sleep?
Forget it.
They believed you would be healed. Now, before you guys get, I'm doing this myself, before you get like, man, how crazy is that? Asclepius is still an image that's around us all the time today. It is the image. You've seen the snake. That comes from the worship of Asclepius.
I'm glad I'm not a doctor.
The snake on the, you know what I'm talking about, medical centers and stuff like that. It's kind of like, I thought this is a place where people got better. What in the world do you have a picture of a snake? Well, it goes back to,
Yeah.
goes back to this. There's also a temple to Caesar. Caesar was worshipped as God. One of the things that kept coming up time and time again in the early centuries of the church was Caesar worship, where you could be required at any time to offer a pinch of incense and say Caesar is Lord. And Christians wouldn't do that. And sometimes they just got in trouble, other times they lost their lives. Sometimes they were held so they could be taken to the Colosseum and things like that.
And I heard too that they would sometimes have to say that Jesus is accursed.
Yeah. I've heard that too. I haven't heard that as frequent.
Chambers said that, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Jesus was what? Excuse me.
Jesus is accursed.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. But it's definitely, they had to, Jesus is Lord as part of that Caesar worship. Anyway, those things were all part of ancient Pergamum. Ancient Pergamum, a lot of ancient cities had a lot of different temples and things like that. Why do we go into this background? Because of the things Jesus is going to say to the church. So let's get into this. Chapter 2, verse 12 says, the angel, the church in Pergamum, right? These are the words of him who has the sharp, double-edged sword. We've already read about this, the picture.
Jesus.
By the way, when Jesus introduces himself, he typically introduces himself a little different to each church. And it's usually pertinent to whatever the issues are. We're going to find out in just a minute, there's satanic issues going on at this church. And the thing that he talks about is, he's the one with the sword in his mouth. Don't you find that interesting? We're going to talk about Satan. Well, Satan's the one who's the father of lies. And so Jesus is going to introduce himself as the father of truth, or the source of truth. So he's the one who has the sharp, double-edged sword. I know where you live, verse 13. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne. Joe Beam often makes the point, and I find it very interesting. Satan is not the equal opposite of God. God is omnipresent. He can be all over the place, all over the place at the same time. Right? Satan cannot be. Satan has his minions. We know that. There are princes. There are demons. There are fallen angels, dark angels, however you want to describe them. But Satan can only be one place at a time. He's got to be somewhere. And is this is figurative language. He could be literally saying, Satan has his throne here. Or he could just be making the point, Satan has a real stronghold here. Could be equally saying it either way. But nonetheless, there's satanic influence. That's why we think about Zeus's temple, Asclepius, or we think of Caesar worship. I know where you live, where Satan's throne is, yet you remain true to my name. You did not renounce your faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city where Satan lives. So he doesn't just make this point, Satan's throne, comes back to it. He's really emphasizing it. You guys live in a really bad place. I want you to notice something here that first time it's pointed out to me, I can't get it out of my mind. Every time I come back to this verse, it just jumps out at me, and here it is. He says, it's Satan's throne. I know where Satan is, and that's where you are. And he never says, get out of there. Never says it. In fact, quite the opposite is emphasized. That's exactly New Orleans and Las Vegas, places where we need strong Christian churches. We really do. We need a good Christian witness there. I've written in just about every Bible I've had in recent years. Next to this passage, I wrote down Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5 is one of the most detailed presentations of a story of a guy we usually refer to as the Gadarene demoniac. He's the man who is hanging around the cemetery. He's hanging around the cemetery and scaring people in town. People in town, when they wanted to try to subdue him, they put chains on him, he'd break the chains. Crazy man, naked, running around the graveyard, scared everybody. When Jesus came to town, there's a reason why I'm reviewing this story, but when Jesus came to that area of the Gadarenes on the other side, the area of the 10 cities on the other side of Sea of Galilee, when he comes there, this demoniac, this guy with a whole bunch of demons, comes and says, I know exactly who you are. Right? Comes to Jesus. And what does Jesus ask him? First of all, he's not talking to the man, he's talking to the demons inside the man. What does he ask? He asks him, what's your name? Now, what does the demon answer?
Legion.
My name is Legion, for we are many. Now, can I ask you a question? Did he really answer the question?
No.
It's kind of like, well, we got a whole bunch of names. There's a whole bunch of us in here. I find that very significant because of what we're going to read in a little bit later on this lesson. Park that in the back of your mind for just a second. So when asked the name, didn't really answer, right? When Jesus cast the demons out, they asked permission because they didn't want to go into the abyss. What's the permission they asked for? A bunch of pigs over there. We're going with the pigs. How many pigs? 2,000. There are a bunch of demons in this guy. 2,000 pigs. When they enter the pigs, what happened to the pigs? Kill the pigs. I'm thinking, who's dumb here? Is it the demons? I'm sorry, I'm going to get sidetracked. Anyway, kills the pigs. This guy's finally, he's presented there. This is all Mark chapter 5. The reason I like Mark chapter 5, it has the most detailed version of this story. There he is in his right mind. Finally, he's got some clothes on. You know, can you imagine? In fact, I can imagine fractionally. I've done some really stupid things in some places, and I don't want to go back there because I did some really stupid things. And here's this guy who's lived a naked life, a demon-possessed life, and you know what he wants? He says, please, let me go with you. And what does Jesus say? No. I need you to stay here. Why? I need you to tell your story. I need you to stay here and tell your story. And we find indication later on that that guy did have an impact on that area. In fact, there's a couple references that make us think that, wow, his story really had some impact. But coming back to this letter of the church of Pergamum, Jesus doesn't tell them, hey, I need you guys to get out of there. No, I need you to stay there. It's a difficult place. There's going to be some challenges, but stay there. Okay, now, Antipas. I don't want to skip over Antipas. He says, you remain faithful even in the days of my faithful servant Antipas. I don't know if any of you have notes by this, Let's tear this word apart. It could be a guy's name. Sounds like an ancient Roman name, doesn't it? Antipas. Right? It could be. And so this simply could be a reference to somebody, such a bad place, they actually martyred people. Guess what? They did that a lot. In the early centuries, the first 3 centuries of the church, a lot of Christians lost their lives. That's a very possible way to translate this. I'm partial to something else personally, because this word, when you take it apart, the first half of the word in Greek is anti. You know what anti means?
Against.
It means against. Antipas. The pas here means everybody.
Obviously, it's against everybody.
It means everybody.
Bless you.
Against the world. You know what? As a Christian, sometimes you're going to feel like you are against the world. You're going to feel like you're the only person who has such narrow conservative views on some issues. Everybody else is just kind of like saying, why don't you give it a break? You're the only person. You know what he's saying? Under all the pressure, all that kind of pressure, I'm proud of you because you didn't crack. You remain true. So maybe it is a person, or maybe it's this is apocalyptic literature. Maybe it's a reference to all the Christians in Pergamum. I'm proud of you guys because you're at Satan's throne, and under that pressure, you didn't crack. It's like you were against all odds and all these other people. Okay, now verse 14. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. There are some among you who hold to the teachings of Balaam. Let's review that story real quick in our mind, because I know you probably already know this story. But Balaam was hired by a guy named Balak. Balak's king of Moab. He's hiring Balaam because he doesn't want the Israelites to go through his territory. And he knows he can't defeat him on the field of battle. How does he know that? Because Og and Sihon have already been defeated. They're greater kingdoms than his kingdom was. It's kind of like, I don't stand a chance, but I can play spiritual warfare here. So I'm going to hire this guy with this reputation as a prophet to come in and curse these people. So he offers to pay him money, sends the dignitaries, and Balaam says, can't go with you unless God says I can. And so he prays to God that night, and God answers him by basically saying, why are you asking me this dumb question? It's not exactly what it says, but it says something like, in other words, it's like God's telling a prophet, you should know better than to ask me a question. No, you can't go. So Balak sends more money the next time, higher dignitaries, offers him more money, and Balaam, instead of saying no, God said no, he says, let me try again. Let me ask God again. So he asked God again, and what does God say? Go ahead, go. There's so many lessons in the story of Balaam. I love that, because a lot of people will say, why did God let him go? I'll tell you why, because God will let you do what you want to do. You want to do something really stupid, and you persist. You know what God said to the prodigal son? Go. Didn't make him stay home. He's not going to put, too many people rationalize things by saying, well, God wouldn't have let it happen if it wasn't his will. No, he'll let you get yourself into a lot of dumb stuff if that's what you really want to do. So Balaam comes back and he gets the answer yes, but on the way back, 3 times, what happens to him? Yeah, an angel of the Lord who would have killed him if it weren't for the fact that his donkey saw it, right? He would have died. God really makes it clear. I really don't want you going. I'm letting you go because you really want to go, but don't you dare say anything I don't want you to say. So 3 different times on 3 different mountaintops, he opens up his mouth to say something, a curse over God's people. But instead of a curse coming out, blessing comes out instead. The 4th time, he goes up on a mountaintop and just blesses the people, right? Balak is really mad. He's kind of like, I promised to pay you a lot of money, but your God has prevented you from getting your paycheck. So here's where we have to put 2 and 2 together, because it sounds like that's the end of the story. But a little bit later, we read that the advice that Balaam gave because of the pay brought the Israelites to their knees. Well, what happened? Well, the sin at Beor was what? Well, it was a sin where the Moabites didn't fight them. They sent their prettiest looking women, their most handsome men, into the Israelites to intermarry and bring a little idol along with them and say, here's the way that we do things in Moab. We can pray to your God, and then let's pinch a little incense over here and bow down to the Queen of Heaven. Let's do some of our stuff too. And so they brought their faith. It's not against intermarriage, it's against interfaith. They brought their bad practices with them. So we surmise from that that Balaam tells Balak, okay, I can't curse these people, but I know how to bring these people down. All you got to do is introduce your false religion and get them to practice it. And you know what? You're never going to do that unless you accept their religion too. Say, your religion's okay, but ours is okay too. So let's just integrate them. Because they integrated them and they got involved in that practice, how many people died? 23,000 in one day. In fact, it didn't end until a guy named Phineas. Yeah. And for some reason, I always remember the girl's name. Remember the girl's name? Cosby. And you know what the sin was? It was a sexual sin that Cosby was committing.
Yeah.
Eerie.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's come back to the letter here. He says, remember this is Bible code language, so they already know the story, so they're going to get this. He says, I have something against you. You hold to the teaching of Balaam. What's the teaching of Balaam? Oh, our God's okay, but you know what? Their God's okay too. It sounds so intolerant, but no, it's not. It's not okay. There's only one God. The teaching of Balaam who taught Balak, see, he's the one who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin so that they ate food sacrificed to idols. It wasn't the intermarriage, it was the religious practices. They ate sacrificed to idols and committed sexual immorality. This was often associated with Baal worship in a lot of the pagan religions of the Old Testament. I'll say this quick, but I feel compelled to say this. Too many times people think, oh yeah, those stupid people, they bowed down to stones and stuff like that. You know, they were just uncivilized and stuff. No. They weren't as stupid as we sometimes put them down to be. What they got sucked into was the fact that it's not so much that there's an idol over here, it's the fact that, ooh, if I go there, they have temple prostitutes, and you know what? It's part of their religion. And so to be faithful, we just have to go to the strip club.
If it feels good to do it.
People still get sucked into strip clubs and things like that. Same basis of how they got sucked into some of their pagan idolatry there, because there was a sexual component to it. Anyway, so he says the sacrifice to idols and sexual immorality. If you're taking notes, I'd like you to write down Romans 14, 1 Corinthians chapter 8, and a little bit in chapter 10, because it talks in great detail about meat sacrificed to idols. And it says, we know there's only one God. So you're not really offering it to any God. Is it okay then to eat meat that's sacrificed to idols?
Yeah.
It depends. It depends. If your conscience and you know, and you're not getting involved in pagan worship, you're just buying meat at the marketplace, who cares where the meat came from? If it's good meat and it's not gone beyond the expiration date, then it's okay. Go ahead and buy it. Don't ask anything. But
That's kind of hard.
if somebody comes up, that expiration date, it's in Romans 14. If somebody comes up to you and says, hey, that's from a cow that was sacrificed over here to Zeus, then what are you supposed to do? Oh, okay, well, walk away from that. But if nobody says anything to you, you know what you're supposed to do?
Yum.
Keep your mouth shut. And go ahead and eat it, because you know better, it's okay. But if somebody says something that obviously bothers them, you don't want to bother somebody else, maybe cause them to stumble. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, because he mixes it with the sexual immorality. It's getting involved in the pagan practices. Don't go there. But they were going there. They were doing that. So what verse was that? 14, thank you. Verse 15. Likewise, you have, likewise. Do you have a different translation for that word? Okay, likewise means, likewise. Means
So you also.
in the same vein. This is where we get a little bit better understanding of what the Nicolaitans are, because he says, in the same vein, likewise, you also have those who hold to the teachings of Nicolaitans. You got to go along to get along, get along to go along. How does that saying go?
Go along.
Nobody's ever heard this. You got to give a little. Yeah, right. That would be the teaching, most likely teaching of the Nicolaitans. Don't be so rigid in your standards of Christianity. They wanted to give up on that. What does he say to them? He says, repent therefore, otherwise I will soon come to you and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. What's the sword of his mouth?
Truth.
Okay, here's the point. Jesus is saying, listen, in the days of Antipas, maybe it's the whole church, there were days where you guys stood strong, regardless of what the pressure was. You were against the world, but you were standing for my pressure. My word. You're standing for my truth, right? Even though you're against the world. However, some of you, maybe a little later on, but some of you gave in to this idea of Balaam and the Nicolaitans. Like, it's okay. We still believe in Jesus. We're still followers of Jesus. We're just not so rigid on this and everything. He says, you know what? If you don't repent of that, I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you it's my word, my truth. That's it. That's what you're going to be judged by. Yes, you have to speak the truth in love, but in your loving, don't ever give up on the truth. You have to maintain the truth. So he's coming back with the sword of his mouth, which is the word of truth. Hebrews 4:12 would be a good reference for that. Verse 17, whoever has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He closes off every letter with this. I don't think I've commented on it yet. But the basic point, I think, is an obvious one. That's this. Anybody can listen to words. Are you really listening? Are you taking it to heart? Don't just sit there, read the letter. Don't just sit there. In most cases, they're not going to read the letter. They're going to be listening to it being read by a public reader. And he's saying, don't just sit there and listen. You take that and you apply it to your life and see where maybe you need to live by the standard truth. So he has ears to hear. Let him hear what the Spirit says. Letters from Jesus, but he also calls it letters from the Spirit. To the one who is victorious, I will give some hidden manna. Every one of these is just a little bit different, but it's so fitting for the church. Hidden manna. Okay, first of all, let's go with the more obvious. What's manna?
Heavenly food.
Okay, I want everybody to say, what is it? Thank you. That's what manna is. Right? Isn't that what the meaning of the Hebrew word? What is it? The food, they went out on the ground, this special food, right?
That's what Moses went out.
Right, in the wilderness experience, it's how they, every 6 days a week, not on the seventh day, on the sixth day you're allowed to take 2 days worth, but just enough to get by for every day. You went out and you gathered this food, miraculously given from God to sustain his people. Okay, why would you tell a church where Satan's throne is that I'm going to give you manna? Can you think of a place where Jesus said, my food is to do the will of the one who sent me, my Father in heaven who sent me. It's when the disciples went in to buy food at Sychar. He said, the woman at the well, remember that? And they come back, aren't you hungry? We've got the food. And he says, my food is to do the will of my Father in heaven. In other words, there's something that's more satisfying, something that's more meaningful to me than eating a meal. If I have to skip a few meals, that's fine. Because something's more important. Something's more satisfying to the soul. Okay, he's got food. He's got something that will satisfy your soul. Hidden. Why is it hidden? Why is it hidden? Can you think of any manna that was hidden away for a long, long time? Yeah.
In the ark.
In the ark. What is the ark? Represents the very presence of God. Hidden manna would be manna that comes from and is next to God. And you know where you live? You live in Satan's throne. Guess what? God's right there next to you. He's got something to sustain you, to fulfill you, to keep you while you're there. He says, I will also give you, not only the hidden manna, I will also give you, I will give that person a white stone with a new name written on it. Do you remember the story I asked you to remember earlier? Mark chapter 5. When Jesus asked the demons, what's your name? Some of us think, I think, the demon skirted the answer. I don't think his name was really Legion. I think he's saying there's a bunch of us, because he didn't want to tell his name. Why didn't he want to tell his name? Because in antiquity, and you're going to find this in several references outside Scripture, people believed that if you knew somebody's name, you had power over them. And often in satanic and in voodoo and all sorts of things, if you've got somebody's name, they will write their name down and use it in a chant, or they'll write their name and put it on an object or something like that. And the name, if you know somebody's name, you've got power over them. What does he say? He says, I'm going to give you a new name, a stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it. Nobody else is going to have power over you. Okay, names in Bible times meant what? Character. Character, right? If you didn't live up to your name, they changed your name, because it's supposed to represent character. Okay, what's the character here that we're talking about? Well, it's a new name written on what? On a white stone. On a white stone. Have you ever heard the expression, he got blackballed?
Yeah.
What does it mean for somebody to get blackballed?
I think I heard him.
Throw you out.
Yeah, excommunicated, but it's more basic than that, is voted against. It goes back to a practice that happened in the first century when you would vote, everybody would have a white stone and a black stone. And you came up to the box and you either dropped in the white stone or the black stone. And as long as they were all white stones, you won. You're accepted, you could be part of it. But if you got blackballed, you got black stone, you're not. Okay, if that's the reference he's making here, then what is he saying? He says, I've got hidden manna, manna in the Ark of the Covenant, manna from God. This will, in the midst of being in Satan's throne, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to sustain you, right? And I will give that person a white stone. God's on your side. He's going to vote for you. Even though you're in Satan's territory, God says, you know what? With me on your side, you can beat Satan. He's going to vote for you with a new name. What new name do you have when you become a Christian? You have been adopted into a new family, and you get a new name. And it means you belong to Him. Christian, belonging to Christ. Right? I just love this, the way he ends this letter, because it's kind of like a word of encouragement to the church there. And I apologize, I thought we'd be halfway through chapter 3 tonight. So. But at least we got Pergamum out of the way, right? And we've got about 3 minutes, so I'll entertain any questions. I seriously doubt I skipped over anything too quickly tonight. But if we did, yeah, Sandy.
Why the phrase to the one who is victorious?
Thank you. One of the themes that we're going to see in all 7 letters, he'll either say faithful or victorious. And the point he's making is don't give up. Which I'm so glad you mentioned that, because doesn't this kind of go against this idea that I made a commitment to the Lord at one time, therefore I'm okay?
Yes.
If that doctrine was true, that once you're saved, you're always saved, then you wouldn't have to worry about being faithful, would you? But he constantly says you have to be faithful to the end. You have to remain to be victorious. In fact, we're going to look at a letter next week where he says, you remain to the end. When I take you to heaven, then it's going to be impossible for you to lose it. But until then, it's quite possible for you to lose it. So, yeah, correct.
Well, it sounds like a lot of these things we're talking about, like what you just mentioned, all sound like teachings of the Nicolaitans. You know, we deal with that every day now because Christianity is under a lot of pressure to accept things, teachings, and more so, I don't know, in my lifetime I'm seeing it more than I used to. I'm sure it's come and gone, you know, over the ages, but...
You bring up an excellent point, because think about this. Think about this. They are where Satan's throne is. You know what Jesus does not say to the church? He does not say, I want you to stop that child sacrifice. He doesn't say, I want you to stop the orgies. He doesn't say any of these extreme things, because you know what? Satan's not going to try to make you a mass murderer tomorrow. all he's going to try to do is get you one step in that direction. So what does Jesus focus on? He focuses on Balaam and the Nicolaitans. You know what Balaam and Nicolaitans are? It's just the idea that, yeah, you can keep your faith and everything, just lighten up a little bit. It's just a movement a little bit in the wrong direction. Satan wins. Satan wins.
Yeah, so you're saved, you're always saved, nothing, you know,
Yeah,
that gets
yeah,
adopted all of
yeah,
a sudden and
yeah.
everybody.
What's probably going to be a whole lot more effective in a church is not some sinful thing, but it's some perversion of something that's actually good. That's all he's got to do.
Come back on the truth.
Yeah, yeah. Let's pray.